Here's lesson number 7 of Unit 6. This is fossils. So a quick definition of what a fossil is. It is evidence of an organism that is preserved from the geologic past. It could be the remains of the organism, so actual pieces of its body, or it could just be a trace that the organism was there at some point. Many of the fossils that we find are of species that are extinct now, meaning that there are no living members left on the earth, but you don't have to be extinct to have a fossil of your species. So this picture here is showing artifacts. These are ancient things that are evidence that people were there once, but since they are not part of an organism or evidence of the body of the organism, they're not considered fossils. There are two main conditions necessary for fossilization to occur. So now just remember that this is a really rare event. It's extremely rare that an organism is going to fall down and die somewhere and a fossil will form out of it. But the conditions that make it so that a fossil will form are rapid burial by sediments. So the organism falls down and then gets buried really quickly by sediment to protect it from weather and decay and from even scavenging animals eating the bones and moving them around. And then if the organism had hard parts, so if it had bones or shells or teeth, it's more likely to turn into a fossil. So something like a dinosaur skeleton is more likely to turn into a fossil than like a dead jellyfish, because a dead jellyfish doesn't have any hard parts that can fossilize easily. So now moving on to types of fossils. The first type of fossil is called petrified fossils. And the word petrified just means turned to stone. So these types of fossils will almost look like a statue of the organism. How these form is essentially water that has lots of dissolved minerals in it will soak into the dead organism that's been buried by sediment. And then it's like every piece of organism is slowly over time replaced by stone instead. And so petrified wood is a really common example of petrified fossil. Here is a petrified dragonfly. You can see it looks like almost like a stone carving of a dragonfly. And then this is a famous fossil of a dinosaur called a nodosaur. It's a really ancient armored herbivore, and you can see that it almost looks like a prop from a movie. It's so well preserved as it's been petrified. So the second type of fossil is called mold and cast. So this is when the organism is buried and then the whole entire organism just dissolves away, leaving behind only an impression. So the mold part of a mold and cast fossil shows the outside surface. So this is like this piece here and this piece here. This is like if you had some clay and squished a seashell into it and then took the seashell away, you'd just get left with the imprint. That's the mold part. And then the cast is the impression of it, which is more of the 3D shape. So this piece is the cast of this trilobite fossil. This piece is the cast of this some type of like ammonite fossil illustration that we have here. Next is the carbon film fossil. So this is when the organism gets buried by lots and lots of layers of really fine sediment. And then over time, the layers above it squeeze out all the liquids and gases and leave behind just a very thin film of carbon. So this type of fossil shows really delicate details, like this fish here. As you can see all the tiny little bones. You can even see some of the details of the scale and some of the webbing in the fins. Here is a fossilized bee. You can see its delicate wings. And then the most common type of carbon film fossil is plants. Plants get preserved as carbon film fossils, and then you can see their tiny little delicate veins in the leaves. Next is preserved remains. This is when almost the whole entire organism is still there. This can happen in a few different ways. So like this baby mammoth here was frozen in permafrost, and so the permafrost thawed and people found the mammoth, and so pretty much the whole entire mammoth is here. It's kind of like mummification. Another example is when bugs or lizards or stuff get stuck in amber, which is tree sap. That tree sap then hardens over millions of years and you've got that bug stuck in the amber. So that's like remember in Jurassic Park when they said that they got dinosaur DNA out of a mosquito that was preserved in amber? This is like that concept. And then here we have some type of millipede that got stuck in a tar pit, and then over millions of years that tar hardened into rock, and we've got this preserved millipede in there. The last type of fossil is a trace fossil. So this is evidence that an organism was there, but it's not actually part of its body. This can be anything from footprints to nests to burrows, or even what's called coprolite, which is like poop or vomit or something from the animal. So here's a trace fossil showing footprints. Here's a trace fossil showing a beehive. You can see the little hexagonal shapes there. And then here is a piece of coprolite. This is a piece of mammal feces that has been fossilized. So fossils are so important to us because they help us build what's called the fossil record. This is pretty much the history of the evolution of life on Earth that we've been able to piece together based on fossil evidence. So the fossil record is incomplete because fossilization is so rare that very few organisms become fossils. So we don't have a perfect record of life on Earth. It's estimated that maybe less than 1% of all species that have ever existed have been preserved as fossils. So the incomplete fossil record, every time we find a new fossil, it's added to the fossil record to help us get a better picture of how life used to be on Earth. So when we're making the fossil record, really important fossils that we look at are called index fossils, and these are fossils that were geographically widespread, so this organism lived over a very large area of the Earth. They were abundant, so there were many of this organism, and they only existed for a short period of time. So when you have an index fossil present in a layer of rock, you can pretty easily tell how old that layer of rock is because of the presence of the index fossil. So like for example, you've got these different locations. They have index fossils in the different layers. You can date those layers to the same age based on the presence of those index fossils. Fossils are really very good for telling us what past environments used to be like. So like this little cartoon over here, in the past, there must have been water because there's a fish fossil, and then there must have been some kind of conditions necessary for big old lizards to live because there's a big old lizard fossil, whereas now there is like primates living. So again, I put this picture of Mount Helena here because the fossils on all the limestone bluffs of Mount Helena, it's just full of little sea creature fossils. And so that is the evidence that we know that Mount Helena is ancient seafloor that was uplifted. And so this portion of Montana used to be covered by a warm, shallow sea. We know that because of all the little seashell fossils at the top.